for both physical and virtual audiences later to participate in the Q&A session. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Wu Wing Tai, Acting CEO of ASLI, to deliver the opening remarks and in turn introduce our session today.
Good afternoon, Datuk Seri Junaidi, Tan Sri Deputy Chair, and my lucky fellow residents of Malaysia. Welcome to the inaugural lecture in this new seminar series, the ASLI Seminar on ASEAN SDG Progress. I am Wu Wing Tai, the Acting CEO of ASLI and convener of this new seminar series. Ladies and gentlemen, the inclined plane on which you are sitting on was in 1980 a downward slide that led into a mining pool that was 200 meters deep. The highly livable and environmentally friendly Sunway City of today was created by Tan Sri Chia from 800 acres of wasteland. The earth was so rich of nutrients that no trees could grow on it and no worms could live in it. This strong moral commitment to responsible stewardship of the natural environment by Tan Sri Chia and many far-sighted leaders in politics, industries, and academic institutions has over time been expanded and codified by the United Nations into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs. These 17 SDGs have been operationalized by specifying 169 numerical indicators. Every aspect of life on Earth and every physical dimension of planet Earth is captured in a measurable statistics. For example, the amount of poverty, the degree of political freedom, the CO2 concentration in the air, the condition of our oceans, and so on. Malaysia has committed itself to the achievement of the 17 SDGs at the UN General Assembly in September 2015. Malaysia also committed itself to fight climate change at the Paris Climate Treaty in December 2015. And the Sunway Group has naturally pledged itself to help Malaysia deliver on its two promises to the global community. ASLI works closely with other entities at Sunway University, like the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development and the Sunway Center on Planetary Health, to advance the sustainability agenda in ASEAN. Sunway University is also the home of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, or UN SDSN. The other two regional offices are in New York City and Paris. Each regional office is tasked with implementing continents-wide sustainability initiatives. Sunway University also houses the SDG Academy, the education arm of the UN SDSN. The SDG Academy is playing a fundamental role in Mission 4.7, which is working to include the sustainability curriculum in all education levels, from kindergarten to high school. Sunway's commitment to the sustainability agenda is driven by its commitment that achieving the SDGs is not the responsibility of governments alone. It requires the commitment of every segment of society: the public sector, the private sector, academia, civil society, and in fact, every single individual to work together. This is what SDG number 17 is all about: the establishment of effective partnerships to solve problems. Ladies and gentlemen, responsible stewardship of the environment is one of the 4 interlocking pillars of sustainable development. The second pillar of sustainable development is economic prosperity and economic equality. The third pillar is social inclusiveness and social harmony. And the fourth pillar of sustainable development is effective administrative governance and adequate political accountability, which are the subjects of today's inaugural lecture by Datuk Seri Junaidi. Datuk Seri's seminar will consist of 2 parts. Part 1 is a lecture and a Q&A session until 4:30 p.m. Part 2 will start at 4:35, will be a short panel discussion on how to use decentralization to accelerate the achievement of a rich, harmonious, and green Malaysia. Future speakers in this series will include global champions of sustainability, such as Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He's a special advisor on sustainability to the UN Secretary General, as well as chairman of the Jeffrey Sachs Center on Sustainable Development here at Sunway University. We will also welcome Professor Mari Pangkestu, the Managing Director of Development Policy and International Partnerships at the World Bank, to speak in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to suggest that the biggest threat to Malaysia in the rest of this decade is the failure to achieve SDG number 17, which is to form effective partner solutions, to form effective partnerships to solve problems. Let us take the case of COVID-19, which has caused economies to crash calamitously everywhere, and which is responsible for why 90% of the audience of today's seminar are participating online rather than in person. The truth is, the COVID-19 problem is not a big medical challenge. The United States, China, and Russia had come up with effective vaccines in less than 11 months. The failure to stop COVID-19 has come from 3 non-medical factors. The first factor is that a significant minority of people who had access to vaccination refused treatment. The leaders in these countries could not galvanize public opinion to reject fake news. This is a failure in political leadership. The second factor is that a large part of the world still has no access to the vaccine. The Delta variant appeared because the Indian population was not vaccinated in time. The Omicron variant appeared next because the South African population was largely not vaccinated. This is a failure in international partnership to fight COVID-19. The third factor in the failure to contain COVID-19 is the inability of nations to engage in scientific collaboration to develop better vaccines and treatment. In September 2021, President Biden held a global summit to mobilize and coordinate global efforts against COVID-19. China, the biggest donor of vaccine in the world, did not attend the summit. China did not attend because the United States invited Taiwan first, and Taiwan quickly accepted the invitation, naturally. And what we have here again is a failure in international partnership. the inability to fight COVID-19 has not been medical in nature. It was the result of countries being unable to cooperate for the common good. This is why when the leading medical journal in the world, The Lancet, decided to form the Lancet Commission on COVID-19, it did not choose a medical doctor to lead the work of the commission. The Lancet chose instead a leading SDG practitioner, Jeffrey Sachs, who is an honorary Jeffrey Chia Distinguished Professor, like our Tan Sri Hisham Noor at Sunway University, to be the chairman of the commission. The geostrategic competition between China and the United States is a failure in international partnership. And this failure is the biggest challenge to sustainable development in Malaysia in this decade. Yes, there is the danger of ASEAN country number 1 being allied with superpower X and ASEAN country number 2 being allied with superpower Y. The bigger danger and the more credible danger is that group number 1 in Malaysia is in the pocket of superpower X, and group number 2 is in the pocket of superpower Y. Remember the past experience of North Korea and South Korea, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, East Germany and West Germany, and in more recent times, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. When Malaysia is politically united strongly, the danger of Malaysia being split by foreign powers will be greatly reduced. I applaud Datuk Seri Junaidi's leadership in institutional reforms that will increase political stability in Malaysia, thereby making the two brothers in Keluarga Malaysia, West Malaysia and East Malaysia, no longer vulnerable to the manipulations of superpower X and superpower Y. In short, Malaysia must form a united internal partnership out of its domestic situation of multiculturalism to offset the failure in international partnership in the external world of multipolar powers. Let me invite Professor Wong Chin Huat, Deputy CEO of ASLI, to chair Datuk Seri Junaidi's talk. Afwan.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Very good afternoon to Datuk Sri, Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia, and friends here in the hall and before the TV screen and online. Beside the 17th goal partnership for all the SDG, when we look at the remaining 16, today we are highlighting SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. We all want economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. But none of this is possible without political stability and accountability. That's what the SDG 16 is about. For the last 6 months, since the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding on Political Transformations and Stability by the Keluarga Malaysia government, led by Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri and the official opposition Pakatan Harapan. We have had 6 months of political stability. There are people who ask, would this stability last? Or would the reform that we have seen in the implementation of the MoU permanently and fundamentally transform our politics for the better? No one can better answer these questions than the man who drives the implementations of the MoU. The man has had one constitutional amendment passed last year on realizing the spirit of the Malaysia Agreement 1963, MA63, and is expected to have 2 more constitutional amendments done in March to enable an anti-hopping law and a 2-term limit on Prime Minister tenure. He is none other than Datuk Sri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister Department in charge of Parliament and Law. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Datuk Sri.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Sri, Professor Wu, Professor Wong, professors, ladies and gentlemen. I never really expected to talk on what we call the MoU entered into by the government and the members of the opposition, which comprise of the Pakatan Harapan's MPs here today. But what I know is this is my second time standing here in this university. The first time was in 2009, giving a talk on the suppression of powers. Because then I was the Deputy Speaker of the Parliament, Malaysia. So, Sri, I would like to register my appreciation to you and the ASLI leadership, Asian Strategy in Leadership, for inviting me and make it possible for me to appear before you to talk on this very, very important subject matter, something which is new to Malaysian politics. It was never considered by many. Well, I can't say that all, because I wrote in my book to say the immaturity of Malaysian politicians for not negotiating whenever there's a stalemate in Parliament. Because I say, for major society, people representative must be prepared to talk. The opposition is not your enemy, and neither is the government to the opposition. We are just different in our political ideology and stand in politics. But for the purpose of the nation and the people, we must be prepared to sit at the same table, solve the national problem for the benefit of the people. And that's what I wrote in the book, 2014. I have always believed in dialogue and discussion. Earlier on, we heard from Professor Wu about sustainable development. But to me, that is very nostalgic. I used to be the Minister of environment, and I was the chief delegation for Malaysia to the Paris Agreement 2015. I have been scolded by White House for become the stumbling block to the final agreement of the Malaysia Agreement, the Paris Agreement, and even complained me to the Secretary General of United Nations, who spoke to Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister called me up. I just asked the Prime Minister, Najib at the time, do you have a new instruction? If you don't, I'm on with the agenda that we had, based on the principle we have agreed. So America, particularly John Kerry and Obama, was trying to suppress the voices of the others, except from America and Paris at that time. But anyway, let's go back to the small enclave, Parliament Malaysia. You remember election, general election of 2018. For the first time in history, the Barisan Nasional, formerly Alliance, was unseated by Pakatan Harapan. It was a very traumatic experience for a lot of people, including myself, because I never foresaw that Barisan Nasional would have lost the election 2018. We did very well in Sarawak because we are different, because we don't look at race, religions so much in the state. We are so united. The difference in ideology doesn't stop us from talking to one another. The difference in religion and culture is always enjoyed by everybody. So that Sarawak, nearly 35% of the people are intermarriage. My wife is Chinese. At one time my wife said to me, the only ethnic group not in the family is Indian. But not long later, my wife niece married Indian. I told my wife, now we have completed. So we have always got a different result. We lost the government 2018. It wasn't a very strong government, but then we should be able to continue to govern if there had not been a fiction or people are looking for an option to find ways to become Prime Minister. So after 22 months, we lost the government of Pakatan Harapan. I'm not here to talk about what happened during the 22 months. Then we have another government formed by Tan Sri Muhyiddin. 17 months and 16 days later, Tan Sri Muhyiddin withdrew. Now we have another government. Can you believe? Since 1957, we have, for the first time, one term parliament, we have 3 prime ministers. Well, can we blame business people not complaining? Can we blame outsiders who think that the country is going into the dark? Because we have been behaving badly politically. And they don't seem to find a mechanism to overcome this in Parliament. During Muhyiddin time, there's so much call for the vote of no confidence or vote of confidence to be carried out in Parliament, resulting in Muhyiddin to step down. Then when Ismail Sabri took over, if you look at this majority, 114 out of 220 members of Parliament, because the two died and we had not replaced. So we are left with 220, not 222, 222 members of Parliament. Then we have 114. Muhyiddin had 115. It's exactly the same reflection of what happened during Muhyiddin's time. But then, if you look at what happened today, since Ismail Sabri took over in August 2021, we seem to be able to calm everybody down. The work seems to proceed as usual. Business people are doing their businesses just as well. I think investment has reached even 100 over billion. That was what I was informed by MITI 2 weeks back. Meaning everything is going back to normal like it was in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And yet, if you look at the support in the government, 114 is just the same kind of number that appeared during Muhyiddin's time. Why it was so tumultuous during Muhyiddin's time, and why it is so looks so stable now, today. In spite of all the thunder and lightning that you can hear outside, people shouting and yelling, but that is what politics is all about. And yet, Parliament is still functioning well. Government can carry on with their program. But the most important thing was, when Sabri Ismail took over the government, he made a point. That was 10 days, slightly more than 10 days before he got his cabinet formed. Ismail Sabri invited several Pakatan Harapan leaders to come to his office for discussion, led by Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, the top, over a cup of coffee. For the first time, I believe, leaders in the top talk responsibly about the nation, about the interest of people, about people like us, just ordinary people, not talking about themselves sitting down as prime minister or ministers. Then they reach a conclusion to accept the offer 3 days before Tan Sri Muhyiddin stepped down. I think we all remember, 3 days before Tan Sri Muhyiddin stepped down, he did offer to Pakatan Harapan for a concession, reform concession, and financial provision, and few others. But it was totally rejected by Pakatan Harapan for reason they think that the fall of Pakatan Harapan government was resulting from the action done by Tan Sri Muhyiddin and his group. Well, that political revenge. And again, when these three talk, they're the same people, basically. Because there is no election, there's no change in the faces of the people sitting in Parliament or sitting in the government. Then they agreed in principle to enter into an agreement which they call CSA, the short form for Confident Supply Agreement. confidence supply agreement is an agreement entered into between members of parliament in some other countries like England, New Zealand, Northern Ireland, even places like Germany. They did have that kind of practice where they want to solve certain problems which they couldn't solve by themselves, the government, because of marginal majority. So they agree among themselves that the opposition will not bring the vote of no confidence against the government in power. That is where the word confident comes from. Sometimes people say it's misnomer. How could they be confident and supply agreement? So the confidence here stands for the vote of not confident or the vote of confident to be carried out in Parliament to make sure the government falls if they have not enough support. Then the supply is in return. Legally they use the word consideration. In return for not taking the vote of no confidence or tabling the vote of no confidence in Parliament, the government must agree to give some concession. For instance, what they did in Northern Ireland was certain provision about scholarship, certain provision about supply and subsidy to agriculture, things like that. What the Parliament can give, what the government can give and approved by the Parliament. So, CSA was mooted by the three of them in the room of PM office over a cup of coffee. Then finally it was handed over to one of the ministers to start the ball rolling. 10 days later, cabinet was formed. Then that's where I came in, Minister of Law, to become the member of the steering committee to look into the agreement, not yet signed. So when it was brought to the committee, 5 from Pakatan Harapan, 5 from the government, all comprised of ministers, include the Minister of Finance to sit in the steering committee. We had a couple of meetings, a couple of days, a couple of meetings. It's a very intensive kind of action in order to conclude the agreement. Then during one of the meetings, we decided not to use the word CSA or Confidence Supply Agreement. Nobody really knew why, but simply the argument was that, well, we try to make it a little bit more friendly, more relaxed, a little bit less stressful, less, what do you call it, binding kind. But then again, if you look at both CSA and MoU that we agreed, the name letter, Memorandum of Understanding, both are not legally binding. Being instrument of the internal matters of Parliament, you cannot go to court to ask for adjudication. And therefore, there is actually no difference between whether it is a confidence supply agreement or it is Memorandum of Understanding or MoU, except on one ground. I never said it, but I happen to be a real ardent student of legislative practice, particularly the Commonwealth. I didn't tell them because there's no system of vote of not confidence in Malaysia. So when we changed from CSA to MoU, that move was relevant to Malaysia for reason no single member of parliament outside the member of government can bring a vote of no confidence against anybody in parliament. You can, but the process is so tedious, so cumbersome, so government you can never get elevated. We have seen many such resolution or motion being brought, but it can never reach the debate level. For reason there is no procedure. Again, I would like to tell you, the standing order and rules of the Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara originate from the standing orders and rules devised by the House of Commons, fourth club to the House of Commons in 1956 to prepare for the Malayan independence at that time. And it has never been substantially amended to accommodate the modern thinking of parliamentarian. Therefore, there is no procedure for a vote of no confidence be brought by any member of parliament unless it is brought by member of the administration. Then he must be a minister. Minister only can override all the huddle. That is why it becomes more relevant to make use of MoU rather than the CSA. So we have the CSA, but to stress, to show the importance of it, we would like all the leaders of the party involved sign the agreement with the Prime Minister, whereas CSA was never reached that level. It is only between member of parliament. But this is the Prime Minister to show the government commitment to observe the term of the agreement. All the party leaders, and we invited two speakers of Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara, to appear during the signing of the MoU as witnesses to the agreement, to show that how important it was insofar as the parliament and the government is concerned. So we have the MoU signed. No less important than CSA. It just to change the name to accommodate the way we work in parliament based on the standing orders and rules that we have. So in there, let me briefly say the content of the MoU. The first part contains the one word, government said transformation of parliament. Pakatan Harapan said, no, it's a reformation of parliament. You cannot transform parliament, you reform parliament. Well, I said it doesn't matter, the words still mean the same. So when from the government you hear transform, when you hear from Pakatan Harapan you say reform. But the word is exactly the same, by introducing another law for parliament. That is Parliamentary Service Act. Second, I would have thought Parliament come up with a new draft for the Houses of Parliament Privilege and Powers Act to replace the obsolete almost the Houses of Parliament Privilege and Powers Act 1952, amended once in 1953, and after that revised in 1988. And I believe if you read that, you will feel that you are living in the 50s rather than to the 2021. It's so old, it simply doesn't reflect Parliament Malaysia anymore, but it is still there, the authority for Speaker to penalize people who are not observing rules of the House. I give you an example. Way back in the 2009, if I'm not mistaken, the late Kapal Singh wanted to enter the House of Parliament, was barred by 4 members of UMNO from entering. And the matter was referred to Privilege Committee. And then at the end of the trial, for the 4 young guys, whole day from morning until evening. When it comes to define something, it's not as simple as it sounds. Then we decided to use 10 years. 2 terms, it could be, what is the term? Is it 5 years term? Or is it the term of service to Prime Minister? Like Mohideen, he served 17 months. Now, Ismail Sabri, I don't know when, less than parliamentary term. It was discussed at length for hours. Professor Wong was there. Still, we couldn't finalize that term post even then. So it's not so easy as it seems. So that's the 2 bill, and apart from that, to implement fully the automatic registration and 18 years old vote. Because what being passed in 2019 was only the amendment to the Constitution. There are many more rules and laws to be done by the SPR, which their time frame, September 2022, until the court sit in Kuching, 3rd September 2021, directed SPR that it must be implemented by January 2022. And that is why SPR finally gazette that rules after being approved by Yang di-Pertuan Agong, because interesting, SPR doesn't go to Parliament. They just bring to the Agong and they got to explain to Agong all the procedures, everything. Once Agong is agreeable to it, then it becomes law under the Election Commission. Then it was gazetted on the 15th, and from the 16th, after 1 month, then the Secretary will sign it, endorse it. On the 16th of January, automatic registration happened in Malaysia. So Johor are likely to use that, and they have no choice. But in the list, which is not yet clean enough, there are people who are living up to 158 years old still in the list. Because there's some state which is not compulsory to report death. So nobody has got a record of somebody died. So we have 7,000 voters aged between 90 to 158 years old in the list. So it is, and now, like Professor Wong just mentioned, we had passed MA 63 amending Article 1 bracket 2 and Article 160 bracket 2 and Article 161A bracket 6 and 7. This simply to get Malaysia Agreement 1963 to go into the Constitution or Federal Constitution. The reason is very strong. When Malaya was federated in 1948, the Pangko Agreement, the Strait Settlement Agreement Melaka and Pulau Pinang, Federal Agreement, and then there's another agreement, 1957, was included in the Federal Constitution of Malaya when Malaya became independent in 1957, and Constitution was enforced 31st of August 1957. And all those agreements were in. But when Malaysia was formed, unfortunately, Malaysia Agreement 1963 was never entered into the Constitution. And therefore, all the constitutional documents, like the IGC report, which Sarawak and Sabah feel so strongly about, right of their right listed therein, is not in the constitution and cannot be referred to in discussion. So it goes through with tremendous support. Everybody want to show they want to support Sabah for political reason, perhaps. 200 for the second reading and 199 for the third reading to pass the bill. Because one person left, he said, I'm sure it will go through even without me. So one of the members of parliament left, one of the oldest member of parliament left. So that's how it worked. Then we have still the outstanding thing. All require parliamentary support of 2/3 majority to amend the constitution. One is to shorten the period or limit the period of service for Prime Minister to 10 years. And the other is on the anti-hawking law, also requires the amendment to Article 10 as well as other part of the Constitution to implement it. Otherwise, it will become the ordinances in Penang, Kelantan, case Nordin Saleh is to the point is contrary, what do you call it, the not constitutional because it's against the right to association. So we have to amend the constitution again. On the 18 voters, we have to also got to amend the constitution to get exemption to the royal, because it was considered the Sultan should not be in the list. So the Sultan, in principle, has agreed to the plan. So we'll have to amend again the constitution to fully realize what to be done for only 18. And that is not all the amendment to constitution to be carried out. If the law for the Parliamentary Service Act is to be brought to Parliament, again we have to amend another part of the constitution, because the Secretary to Parliament is actually appointed by the Agong under the Constitution. It is a constitutional appointment. It's not by JPA. And therefore, again, we have to amend Federal Constitution. Therefore, for now, under the MoU, we still have 18 voters, Secretary to Parliament, Dewan Rakyat, Dewan Negara, Secretary, then the anti-hawking law, then the service of Prime Minister. There are 5 amendments due to be done. And that's why Professor Wong said it's going to be record. No such amendment happened before. You don't carry out. And that is how my workload become more, because I got to convince everybody. And I make trip Sabah, Sarawak, meeting all the party leaders to show them their support is imperative. I have no choice to see them, convince them, each and every one of them. And the other problem was the group, even though the same party, they didn't want to meet at the same time, so we have to see them by group, not by party. So that, now let's say if you didn't have that agreement, MoU, we didn't have. So far, so good. Pakatan Harapan keep the word. Government delivered. All these MA63 amendments have gone through with fantastic result. What left now is the anti-hawking law and the period of service for Prime Minister. Because it is stated in the MoU to say that it must be tabled by March. And we have not concluded on the definition. 20 questions raised up by the AG, Attorney General, have not all been answered. But Prime Minister's request to me is, we must be tabled by March. And I stand with that, like what I said in AWANI, and I even told the Prime Minister, we didn't have to look for consensus. Let Member of Parliament decide in Parliament for the amendment. So once we have reasonably completed the draft, which we feel is the best for the nation, then we are going to table it. And all this under the MP.MoU, without which we can't get it through. I can be assured, because 114, Sabri Ismail just simply cannot push it. We need 2/3 majority. The 2/3 majority is not the 2/3 majority of Member of Parliament who attended Parliament. 2/3 majority of the number of Parliament alive, 220. So that 148 Member of Parliament required to support the bill to pass the law to amend the Constitution. So again, this is about the law. And what about the budget? If we didn't have the MoU, the possibility the budget, some segment of it will not be supported by, would have not been supported by Members of Parliament. Then we had a problem. If the budget didn't go through, we have heard of America, office closed down, government officers don't get paid, and they just go to office to see around and go back because they can't work. So in our case, most probably even our electricity we can pay in the office. Imagine that if the budget is not passed. So that also tantamount to vote on a confidence in the context of Commonwealth. Then I don't think Yang di Pertunagung would call again who would like to become the Prime Minister, because the number will be exactly the same again. You remember, Tan Sri Muhyiddin managed to garner that much, and Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri garnered the same number almost. Only the difference is not so much upheaval after the MoU. Is stabilized. The investments start coming in. Business people start doing their work, except for COVID, of course. The budget passed because of the MoU. And so we didn't face the problem the America faced once the budget not supported by Congress. Can you imagine our government officers, 1 million of them, not get paid? Most probably only senior officers will go to office. The junior one will start selling goreng pisang on the roadside in the Kerai. Otherwise, how could they survive? And what about the project? What are the support to all the needies? So there are so much things that give the reason why the MoU become very, very important. It is not true that we harness the freedom of the opposition to play their role in the opposition. Datuk Sri Anwar is still very robust, demanding for this and that outside the MoU, asking for why this thing is not done, why that thing is not done, and the government got to respond. For instance, the question of Batu Putih, Member of Parliament raised up the issue. The question of Adib Adam, Members of Parliament raised up the issue. We responded. We took action. And the action is still ongoing. Meaning, the role of Member of Parliament as opposition is never being disturbed. Our MoU especially mentioned that they continue to play the role as in opposition. But like the CSA, please don't raise up the issue of confidence. Don't oppose the government bill if it's benefited the Rakyat and the people, the nation. And anything that you don't agree, talk with us. Just like what happened to the bill that raised the penalty for COVID infringement of law. This was being taken out from the list during the session. So we can see the opposition are still playing the role as they did before. The only thing is there's not so much talking like what happened during Tan Sri Muhyiddin's time about the vote of no confidence, because the vote of no confidence resulting in the government change. And during COVID, we cannot imagine to have election, even though it did very well in Sarawak. It didn't increase, no spike of COVID infection in Sarawak after the election. But that, again, I'm talking about Sarawak. We listen to authority. But see what happened in Malacca, it was okay. But a lot of people got penalized, compounded, include ministers, by the government. So during the height of COVID, we tried to avoid the election. That's why it became very imperative for the government to have the MoU then with the. This is not in any way eroded the function of democracy or performance of democracy played in Parliament by Member of Parliament. So even though this is new to us, we did it very well. We saw also CSA fail in other countries. Northern Ireland failed. They failed for reason that the government couldn't provide the provision that they are asking, because a little bit too much money to be spent. But in New Zealand, also there is some hiccup in implementing the CSA. Well, Theresa May's government also faced the same thing. Some unperformed part by the government. So that is why I become the focal point to make sure the government perform. For instance, the anti-hopping law, limiting the PM service that must be tabled in Parliament in March 2022. And then most probably, the Parliament already notified me, if we can table the two bills in Parliament, then we raise up the issue with PM to have a special session just to pass the law for the transformation of Parliament. So, MoU is a good practice, practiced by many Commonwealth countries. If everybody observe the term and condition that we agreed on, it will deliver the stability and the transformation we expect. Perhaps it also renders the country more stable. I think the majority of the Member of Parliament be disciplined a little bit, not to be too emotional. One thing that we can do. So, Tan Sri, I saw the placard at the back. It's not like the placard in Parliament, but telling me that time is up. I think, yeah, thank you very much again for listening to me for the talk on MoU or CSA, Confidence and Supply Agreement vis-à-vis the Memorandum of Understanding done by Malaysian Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, Datuk Seri, and for your very insightful lecture. Many people see the MoU cynically as a compromise out of convenience. But from what you have told us, this is actually a paradigm shift, that having different opinion does not necessarily means that we have to be enemies. And that's important. And Datuk Seri, you're not only going to be the minister that perhaps brings the most constitutional amendments in a term, but I think you also show how an East Malaysian leader can bring a different types of politics to the picture. Congratulations, Datuk Seri. And there are questions popping up that will all these things be changed after the next election? The related question to that is, if election is not to be called immediately after the end of the MoU by 31st of July, then the government will have a longer time where we actually have more reforms that we can actually put in. Because from what you have shown us, this is actually a good time for us to prepare for the future, because we may have again another hung parliament, or we may have a restoration of a strong government. But in either way, we probably need more changes. Now, I would like to open to the floor. Anyone want to have any questions, please raise your hand. Right, I would like to invite Ms. Mahabarakrishnan. She's a leading expert on parliamentary matter and proudly a JCI fellow.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Chin Huat. I feel a little humbled to be called a parliamentary expert in front of Datuk Seri Junaidi. I'm certainly not compared to his experience. Datuk Seri, if I may, first of all, congratulate you on the progress that you've managed to make thus far with institutional reforms under the MoU. My question actually falls into two parts, if I may. So first off, while the MoU is indeed groundbreaking and it has achieved its aim of creating political stability, it is still essentially a short-term and bilateral agreement. What's missing perhaps is, or rather what's less obvious, are the long-term benefits to parliamentary democracy, and I'm talking specifically about the processes and procedures in Parliament. So my question, Datuk Seri, is what specific improvements, apart from the Parliamentary Services Act, can we expect to see to parliamentary procedures, amendments and improvements that I hope will strengthen the independence and equality between MPs? You mentioned some of that already. You spoke, and you were of course right, about the special privileges that ministers have in Parliament that other MPs, private members, whether they are on the government backbench or the opposition, don't have on simple things like moving